Augusta Blackmore could create flavors that made grown men weep with joy, but his true masterpiece was murder. Behind his restaurant's golden reputation lay a systematic campaign of assassination disguised as haute cuisine. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from all corners of the world. Now dim the lights, perhaps light a candle for that flickering ambiance. And let's begin our journey together tonight into the dark kitchens of Venice, where culinary genius masked the most elaborate poisoning operation in European history. The morning mist rolled across the canals of Venice as Master Augusta Blackmore stood in his pristine kitchen, surveying the domain that had made him the most celebrated chef in all of Europe. At 43, he possessed the bearing of a man who had conquered not just the culinary world, but something far more sinister. His tall, lean frame moved with practiced efficiency between the copper pots and marble preparation surfaces, while his dark eyes held secrets that would have chilled the blood of every nobleman who had praised his exquisite creation. La Tavola Dorata, the Golden Table, occupied the most prestigious location along the Grand Canal, its ornate facade reflecting the wealth and sophistication of its exclusive clientele. The restaurant had become synonymous with culinary perfection throughout the Venetian Republic, attracting princes, dukes, and foreign dignitaries who competed for reservations at Augusta's legendary establishment. What none of these distinguished guests suspected was that their beloved chef viewed each meal as an opportunity to practice an art far more dangerous than cooking. The transformation of Augusta from impoverished kitchen servant to master of gastronomic assassination had been a journey spanning nearly 3 decades, marked by careful study, methodical planning, and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened his rise to power. His early years in the kitchens of Venice had taught him that survival required more than culinary skill. It demanded the ability to recognize opportunity in every circumstance and exploit human weakness with surgical precision. Duke Marcello Venetico had been Augusta's first noble victim, though the method had been crude compared to the sophisticated techniques he would later develop. The Duke's fondness for rich, heavily spiced foods had provided perfect cover for the introduction of exotic seasonings that would gradually weaken his constitution over the course of several months. The slow deterioration of Marcello's health had been attributed to his excessive lifestyle and advancing age, while Augusta's reputation had been enhanced by his apparent concern for his patron's declining appetite. The death that had finally claimed Duke Marcello had occurred during what appeared to be a perfectly normal evening meal at La Tavola Dorata. The Duke had arrived in excellent spirits, praising Augusta's latest culinary innovations, while discussing plans for expanding the restaurant's influence throughout the Mediterranean. The meal had proceeded without incident, featuring Augusta's signature osso buco, prepared with rare herbs imported from the Ottoman territories, accompanied by wines selected specifically for their compatibility with the Duke's refined palate. It was only during the final course, a delicate panna cotta infused with essence of bitter almonds, that Duke Marcello had begun experiencing the symptoms that would lead to his rapid demise. The initial discomfort had been dismissed as simple indigestion, a common consequence of indulging in Augusta's rich cuisine. However, within minutes, the Duke's condition had deteriorated dramatically, his face flushing with an alarming crimson hue while his breathing became increasingly labored. Augusta had responded to the crisis with apparent expertise, immediately summoning the finest physicians in Venice, while personally attending to the Duke's comfort. His knowledge of medical remedies had impressed the attending doctors, who noted his quick thinking in administering treatments that might have saved a younger man with a stronger constitution. The general consensus among the medical professionals had been that Duke Marcello had suffered a massive cardiac episode brought on by years of dietary excess, a verdict that enhanced rather than diminished Augusta's reputation for caring deeply about his patron's welfare. The kitchen laboratories that Augusta had constructed beneath La Tavola Dorata represented years of careful planning and substantial investment in equipment that served purposes far beyond conventional food preparation. Hidden behind wine cellars and storage areas, these chambers contained apparatus for distilling plant essences, fermenting exotic compounds, and testing combinations that could produce effects ranging from mild discomfort to rapid death. Filippo Grimani had been among the first professionals to be recruited into Augusta's expanding network, his expertise in natural philosophy and chemical analysis, providing the scientific foundation necessary for developing more sophisticated assassination techniques. The physician's financial difficulties and professional disappointments had made him receptive to opportunities that conventional practice could never provide, while his knowledge of anatomy and physiology had proved invaluable for understanding how different compounds affected various organ systems. The success that Augustin had achieved through his first elimination had demonstrated that careful planning and appropriate technique selection could overcome any defensive measure, while actually enhancing his reputation among potential future targets. The art of culinary assassination had begun to evolve into a comprehensive system for systematic social manipulation that would eventually reshape entire power structures, while remaining completely invisible to conventional law enforcement. The morning after Duke Marcello's funeral, Augustin Blackmore stood before the ornate mirror in his private chambers above La Tavola Dorata, studying the reflection of a man who had transcended the boundaries between culinary artistry and systematic murder. The techniques that had claimed his first victim had been merely an experiment compared to the sophisticated operations he was now prepared to implement. The time had come to demonstrate that his capabilities extended far beyond individual eliminations to encompass systematic manipulation of Venice's entire aristocratic hierarchy. Countess Isabella Grimani had been selected as Augusta's second victim, not simply because of her immense wealth, but because her elimination would provide access to the most exclusive social circles in the Venetian Republic. Her position as the unofficial queen of Venice's cultural elite made her both valuable and dangerous, as her influence could elevate reputations or destroy them with equal effectiveness. More importantly, her suspicious nature and extensive knowledge of court intrigue made her a formidable adversary who would require Augusta's most advanced techniques to overcome. The challenge that Countess Isabella presented had demanded developing entirely new approaches that could penetrate defenses built through decades of navigating the treacherous waters of aristocratic politics. Her habit of employing multiple food tasters and her preference for dining only in locations under her complete control had made conventional poisoning methods impossible, while her network of spies and informants had made direct approach extremely risky. Augusta's solution had involved establishing himself as an indispensable cultural figure whose artistic genius transcended mere cooking, to encompass complete aesthetic experiences that transformed dining into transcendent art. His strategy had required years of careful relationship building with poets, musicians, and philosophers who could provide intellectual credibility that would appeal to Isabella's sophisticated tastes and competitive desire to discover artistic innovations before her rival. The opportunity to approach Countess Isabella had come through Professor Lorenzo Bembo, a noted philosopher and collector of rare manuscripts, who had become one of Augusta's most enthusiastic patrons after experiencing several private dinners that had combined exquisite cuisine with intellectually stimulating conversation about the intersection of art and sensory experience. Lorenzo's reputation for discovering hidden talents and his influence within Venice's academic circles had made him the perfect intermediary for introducing Auguste to the Countess. The salon that had provided Auguste with his first encounter with Countess Isabella had been organized to celebrate the acquisition of a rare Byzantine manuscript that Lorenzo claimed contained lost recipes from the imperial kitchens of Constantinople. The gathering had included Venice's most sophisticated intellectuals and cultural arbiters, creating an atmosphere where Auguste's presence as both chef and scholar could be appreciated without the commercial associations that might have made the Countess suspicious of his motives. The private dinner that Countess Isabella had eventually agreed to host had been presented as an opportunity to recreate authentic Byzantine imperial cuisine using the recipes discovered in Lorenzo's manuscript, combined with Auguste's innovative interpretations that would demonstrate how ancient traditions could be enhanced through contemporary technique. The project had appealed to the Countess's intellectual vanity while providing Auguste with the intimate access necessary for implementing his elimination plan. The banquet that had sealed Countess Isabella's fate had been a masterpiece of historical recreation combined with culinary innovation that had impressed even the most sophisticated guests with its authenticity and artistic excellence. Each course had been based on documented imperial recipes while incorporating Auguste's signature techniques that elevated traditional preparations to transcendent levels of sensory pleasure. The effects of Auguste's preparations had begun manifesting only after all the guests had departed, and the Countess had retired to her private chambers, starting with symptoms that appeared to be simple fatigue following an evening of intellectual stimulation and rich cuisine. However, her condition had deteriorated rapidly over the following days, progressing through stages of weakness, confusion, and finally complete organ failure that had proved resistant to every medical intervention that Venice's finest physicians could provide. Baron Federico Morosini had presented Auguste with an entirely different category of challenge, as his military background and naturally suspicious temperament had made him resistant to the social approaches that had proven effective with previous victims. His position as one of Venice's most successful military contractors had provided him with resources and connections that made him both valuable and dangerous, while his knowledge of battlefield tactics and survival techniques had made him naturally cautious about potential threats. The approach that Auguste had developed for eliminating Baron Federico had required establishing professional credibility through military supply contracts that positioned him as a logistics expert capable of providing specialized services that conventional suppliers could not match. His network of international contacts had enabled him to offer rare delicacies and exotic preparations that would appeal to soldiers and commanders who had developed sophisticated tastes during campaigns in foreign territory. The private campaign dinner that had provided Auguste with his opportunity to eliminate Baron Federico had been arranged to celebrate the successful conclusion of negotiations for a major defensive contract that would significantly expand Venetian military capability. The intimate setting had enabled Auguste to prepare each dish personally while engaging in detailed discussions about military strategy and future expansion plans that had revealed valuable intelligence about Venetian defensive preparation. The elimination method that had claimed Baron Federico had involved compounds that produced symptoms resembling infected battle wounds, creating the appearance that old injuries from his military service had suddenly become life-threatening due to foreign materials that had remained dormant in his system for years. The progression of his illness had been consistent with medical knowledge about battlefield injuries that could develop complications long after initial treatment had appeared successful. The techniques that Auguste had developed through the elimination of Countess Isabella and Baron Federico demonstrated his ability to adapt his methods to overcome even the most sophisticated defenses while maintaining perfect cover for activities that appeared to serve legitimate professional purposes. His success in penetrating both intellectual and military circles had proven that systematic planning and careful execution could overcome any obstacle while building foundations for operations that extended far beyond individual assassination. The winter months that followed Baron Federico's funeral had provided Auguste with the solitude necessary to perfect the laboratory complex that would serve as the foundation for his most ambitious operations. The third floor beneath La Tavola Dorata had been excavated and reinforced to create chambers that rivaled the finest alchemical workshops of Constantinople or Cairo, equipped with apparatus for distillation, fermentation, and chemical analysis that enabled systematic development of compounds whose effects transcended anything that traditional poison makers could achieve. The laboratory's central chamber contained Auguste's masterpiece, a comprehensive botanical processing facility that could extract, concentrate, and combine active principles from specimens gathered throughout the known world. Glass vessels filled with exotic plants lined the walls, their contents representing years of careful collection and cultivation that had transformed the chef's private island into one of Europe's most dangerous botanical gardens. Alessandro Morosini had been recruited specifically to oversee the laboratory's medical research division, his expertise in anatomy and physiology providing the scientific foundation necessary for understanding how different compounds affected various organ systems. The physician's background in treating battlefield injuries had given him unique knowledge of how the human body responded to trauma and toxic substances, while his willingness to conduct experimental procedures had made him invaluable for testing new elimination techniques. Duchess Caterina Dandolo had been selected as the first subject for testing these advanced compounds, her position as Venice's most prominent hostess, making her both valuable and dangerous to Auguste's expanding operation. Her influence over the city's social calendar had made her cooperation essential for gaining access to other high-value targets, while her suspicious nature and extensive knowledge of court intrigue had made her a potential threat that required elimination through methods so sophisticated that even her death would enhance rather than diminish Auguste's reputation. The approach that Auguste had developed for penetrating Caterina's defenses had involved establishing himself as an indispensable cultural authority whose artistic vision could transform ordinary social events into transcendent experiences that would be remembered and discussed throughout Venetian society for generations. His strategy had required years of careful relationship building with artists, musicians, and intellectuals who could provide the cultural credibility necessary for approaching someone of the Duchess's sophistication.
The opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities to Duchess Caterina had come through the organization of a grand banquet celebrating the anniversary of Venice's victory over the Ottoman fleet at Lepanto, an event that demanded historically authentic preparations combined with artistic innovations that would honor the city's military heritage, while showcasing its continued cultural supremacy. Auguste's proposal to recreate the victory feast using documented recipes from the period had appealed to Caterina's patriotic sentiments while providing him with perfect cover for introducing exotic ingredients whose true purposes extended far beyond historical authenticity. The banquet hall at the Dandolo Palace had been transformed into a recreation of the admiral's flagship, complete with naval decorations and maritime furnishings that created an atmosphere of historical authenticity while providing Auguste with opportunities to introduce specialized equipment and materials under the guise of period-appropriate presentation. The elaborate theatrical elements had required extensive preparation that enabled him to establish complete control over every aspect of the evening's arrangements. The compound that had been specifically designed for Duchess Caterina had been integrated into the evening's signature dish, a recreation of the admiral's personal favorite that combined traditional Venetian ingredients with exotic spices that had supposedly been captured from Ottoman vessels during the battle. The preparation required extended cooking time that enabled Auguste to achieve precise chemical transformations, while creating flavor profiles that masked any unusual tastes that might have indicated the presence of foreign materials. The effects of Auguste's preparation had been carefully timed to begin manifesting only after all the guests had departed and the Duchess had retired to her private chambers. The initial symptoms had appeared to be simple exhaustion following an evening of elaborate entertainment, a reasonable response that had been expected and dismissed by her personal attendants. However, her condition had deteriorated rapidly over the following days, progressing through stages that had perfectly mimicked the advancement of a hereditary heart condition that had claimed several members of her family. Count Alessandro Barbero had presented Auguste with entirely different challenges, as his position as one of Venice's most successful international merchants had provided him with extensive knowledge of foreign cultures and trading practices that made him naturally suspicious of unusual offerings or extraordinary claims. His wealth derived from carefully managed commercial relationships throughout the Mediterranean, while his survival instincts had been honed through decades of navigating the treacherous waters of international commerce. The approach that Auguste had developed for eliminating Count Alessandro had required establishing professional credibility through legitimate trading relationships that positioned him as a supplier of rare culinary ingredients, whose exotic origins and exceptional quality justified premium prices. His network of international contacts had enabled him to offer genuine delicacies that would appeal to someone whose sophisticated palate had been developed through extensive travel and exposure to diverse culinary traditions. The private dinner that had provided Auguste with his opportunity to eliminate Count Alessandro had been arranged to celebrate the successful conclusion of a major trading agreement that would significantly expand the Count's commercial operations into territories that Auguste's own network had helped to identify and develop. The business context had enabled Auguste to prepare specialized dishes that showcased ingredients from the regions where their commercial partnership would be operating. The elimination method that had claimed Count Alessandro had involved compounds derived from plants that grew in the specific territories where his new trading operations would be established, creating the appearance that he had contracted a tropical disease during preliminary reconnaissance visits to assess commercial opportunities. The progression of his illness had been consistent with medical knowledge about diseases that commonly affected European traders who ventured into exotic markets without proper preparation. Prince Lorenzo Falier had represented Auguste's most ambitious target yet, as his elimination would provide access to government contracts and political connections that could enable operations extending far beyond individual assassinations into realms of systematic social manipulation. The prince's position within Venice's ruling council had made him both extremely valuable and extraordinarily dangerous, while his knowledge of state security measures had made direct approach virtually impossible. The state dinner that had provided Auguste with his opportunity to eliminate Prince Lorenzo had been organized to entertain visiting ambassadors from the Holy Roman Empire who were negotiating new trade agreements that would significantly expand Venetian commercial privileges throughout German territory. The diplomatic context had required elaborate entertainment that would demonstrate Venice's cultural sophistication while providing opportunities for discreet political discussion. The compound that had eliminated Prince Lorenzo had been designed to produce symptoms resembling the effects of poisoned diplomatic gifts, a traditional assassination method that had been used throughout European courts for centuries but which had been refined through Auguste's laboratory research to eliminate any possibility of detection or analysis. The timing of his death during sensitive diplomatic negotiations had actually strengthened Venice's negotiating position by creating sympathy that had influenced the final terms of the commercial agreement. The laboratory expansion that had followed Prince Lorenzo's successful elimination had enabled Auguste to establish satellite research facilities throughout the Venetian territory, creating a network of chemical workshops that could operate independently while serving the coordinated objectives of his expanding criminal enterprise. Each facility had been disguised as legitimate commercial operations that provided perfect cover for activities whose true purposes would never be acknowledged by local authorities. The spring of 1583 brought unprecedented expansion to Auguste's criminal enterprise as his network of associates established operations throughout the Italian peninsula and beyond. The success of his Venetian eliminations had attracted attention from wealthy clients who required discreet solutions to their own political and commercial problems, transforming Auguste from individual assassin into the coordinator of Europe's most sophisticated murder-for-hire organization. The headquarters that Auguste had established beneath La Tavola Dorata had evolved into a complex that rivaled government intelligence centers in its scope and sophistication. Multiple levels of underground chambers housed specialized laboratories, communication centers, and training facilities that enabled systematic development of assassination techniques, while maintaining perfect operational security. The most sensitive operations were conducted in chambers that had been excavated from solid bedrock, their existence unknown to anyone except Auguste's most trusted associates. Professor Benedetto Grimani had been recruited to oversee the organization's research and development activity, his expertise in natural philosophy and chemical analysis providing the scientific foundation necessary for developing elimination techniques that pushed the boundaries of what contemporary chemistry could achieve. The professor's academic credentials had enabled him to establish legitimate research partnerships with universities throughout Europe, creating cover for acquiring exotic materials and specialized equipment that served purposes far beyond conventional scholarly. Cardinal Niccolò Barbarigo had emerged as Auguste's most valuable target, his position within the Vatican hierarchy providing access to political intelligence and financial resources that could enable expansion of operations throughout the Papal States and beyond. The cardinal's influence over ecclesiastical appointments and his knowledge of church finances had made him both extremely valuable and extraordinarily dangerous, while his reputation for moral rectitude had made direct approach virtually impossible. The strategy that Auguste had developed for penetrating Cardinal Barbarigo's defenses had involved establishing himself as a provider of specialized services for religious ceremonies and ecclesiastical entertainments, positioning his culinary expertise as essential for events that required demonstration of the Church's cultural sophistication and international influence. His approach had required years of careful relationship building with lesser church officials who could provide recommendations and testimonials about his artistic capabilities and moral reliability. The opportunity to approach Cardinal Barbarigo had come through the organization of a grand reception celebrating the elevation of Venetian noblemen to episcopal rank, an event that demanded elaborate entertainment demonstrating the Church's continued commitment to promoting worthy candidates while maintaining the highest standards of cultural refinement. Auguste's reputation for creating historically authentic religious banquets had made him the obvious choice for overseeing an event that would be attended by representatives of the highest levels of ecclesiastical hierarchy. The reception hall at the Episcopal Palace had been transformed into a recreation of early Christian banqueting tradition, complete with historically accurate furnishings and ceremonial elements that created an atmosphere of religious authenticity while providing Auguste with opportunities to introduce specialized equipment and materials under the guise of period-appropriate presents. The elaborate religious themes had required extensive preparation that enabled him to establish complete control over every aspect of the evening's arrangement. The compound that had been specifically prepared for Cardinal Barbarigo had been integrated into the ceremonial wine that concluded the evening's religious observance, a traditional blessing that required the cardinal to consume the entire contents of a specially prepared chalice, while offering prayers for the newly elevated bishop's success in his pastoral duties. The religious context had made refusal impossible while providing perfect cover for introducing substances whose effects would manifest only after the cardinal had returned to his private chambers. The elimination method that had claimed Cardinal Barbarigo had been designed to produce symptoms resembling divine judgment for hidden sins, creating the appearance that the cardinal had been struck down by heavenly wrath for transgressions that only God could know. The progression of his illness had been consistent with religious accounts of supernatural punishment, while the timing of his death during a period of intense spiritual activity had been interpreted by church authorities as evidence of divine intervention in ecclesiastical affairs. Duke Elviso Mocenigo had represented Auguste's next strategic target. His position as one of Venice's wealthiest nobles, providing access to commercial networks and political connections that could enable systematic expansion of operations throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Duke's extensive trading relationships with Ottoman merchants had made him valuable for establishing supply lines for exotic materials, while his knowledge of international commerce had made him dangerous as someone who might recognize the true scope of Auguste's import operation. The commercial banquet that had provided Auguste with his opportunity to eliminate Duke Mocenigo had been organized to celebrate the successful conclusion of a major trading agreement with Constantinople merchants who were expanding their operations into Venetian territory. The international context had required elaborate entertainment that would demonstrate Venice's cosmopolitan sophistication while providing opportunities for discreet business discussions about future commercial cooperation. The elimination compound that had claimed Duke Mocenigo had been derived from plants that were commonly used in Turkish traditional medicine, creating the appearance that he had contracted a rare Eastern disease during his commercial negotiations with Ottoman traders. The exotic nature of his symptoms had been consistent with medical knowledge about diseases that could be transmitted through contact with foreign merchants, while the timing of his death during active business negotiations had enhanced rather than diminished the credibility of explanations attributing his demise to occupational hazard. Marquis Vittorio Contarini had provided Auguste with opportunities to test advanced techniques for eliminating targets whose suspicious nature and extensive security measures made them extremely challenging subjects for conventional assassination methods. The Marquis's background in military intelligence and his natural paranoia about potential threats had made him resistant to social approach, while his habit of employing multiple food tasters and his preference for dining only in locations under his complete control had made poisoning seem virtually impossible.
The private family dinner that had provided Auguste with his ultimate opportunity had been arranged to celebrate the marriage of the Marquis's daughter to a member of another prominent Venetian family, an intimate gathering where elaborate security measures would have been inappropriate and potentially offensive to the honored guests. The family context had enabled Auguste to position himself as a trusted service provider whose presence was essential for creating an appropriately memorable celebration. The elimination method that had finally claimed Marquis Contarini had involved compounds that were introduced through the wedding gifts that Auguste had prepared as traditional presentations from the bride's family to their honored guests. The ceremonial nature of these offerings had made consumption obligatory while providing perfect cover for introducing substances whose effects would be attributed to the emotional stress and celebratory excitement of the family occasion. The success that Auguste had achieved through system application of advanced elimination techniques had demonstrated that criminal organizations could operate on scales that enabled them to influence political and economic processes throughout entire regions while remaining completely invisible to conventional law enforcement. His transformation from individual poisoner to coordinator of international assassination networks had proven that scientific methodology and careful planning could overcome any defensive measure while building foundations for operations that could shape the development of European civilization itself. The autumn of 1584 would mark the culmination of Auguste's criminal career as Father Giuseppe Benedetti, the Vatican's most skilled investigator of ecclesiastical crimes, began connecting the pattern of deaths that had befallen Venice's noble families over the past several years. The priest's reputation for solving impossible cases had made him the Holy See's primary weapon against corruption and criminal activity within church territories, while his analytical mind and relentless persistence had enabled him to identify connections that had escaped every other investigator. Father Giuseppe's interest in the Venetian deaths had been triggered by Cardinal Barbarigo's demise, which had occurred under circumstances that seemed inconsistent with the cardinal's reputation for exemplary health and moral rectitude. The priest's investigation had begun with careful analysis of death records, witness testimonies, and circumstantial evidence that revealed patterns suggesting something far more sinister than coincidence or divine judgment. The statistical analysis that Father Giuseppe had conducted had demonstrated that the probability of so many prominent figures dying within such a compressed time frame was virtually impossible under natural circumstances, while his examination of the specific circumstances surrounding each death had revealed subtle consistencies that indicated systematic planning rather than random misfortune. His background in mathematics and natural philosophy had enabled him to calculate odds that no reasonable person could attribute to chance. Augusti's first awareness of the investigation had come through his network of informants within ecclesiastical circles, agents whose positions enabled them to monitor church activities and report developments that might threaten organizational security. The intelligence that had reached him about Father Giuseppe's inquiries had been fragmentary but alarming, suggesting that someone with formidable analytical capabilities was examining connections that had been carefully concealed through years of meticulous planning. The challenge that Father Giuseppe represented had required Augusti to develop entirely new approaches for neutralizing a threat whose professional competence exceeded anything his previous experience had prepared him to counter. The priest's reputation for moral integrity had made conventional corruption impossible, while his intellectual capabilities and investigative methodology had made him resistant to the kinds of social manipulation that had proven effective against other potential threats. Augusti's solution involved creating circumstances that would enable him to eliminate Father Giuseppe while simultaneously destroying the evidence that the priest had accumulated and deflecting suspicion from his own activities through a spectacular demonstration that would be remembered as the most elaborate poisoning in European history. The plan that he had developed would require coordinating multiple elimination operations during a single event while ensuring that his own role remained completely concealed. The Grand Carnival banquet of 1585 had provided the perfect opportunity for implementing Augusti's final masterpiece, an event that attracted the highest levels of Venetian society while providing cover for activities that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The carnival atmosphere had enabled Augusti to introduce theatrical elements and exotic presentations that masked the systematic elimination of multiple targets, while creating a memorable spectacle that would overshadow any investigation of the evening's tragic conclusion. The guest list for the carnival banquet had been carefully curated to include not only Father Giuseppe, but also 12 members of Venice's most prominent noble families, whose continued existence posed various threats to Augusti's operations, or whose elimination would provide valuable resources for future activity. The selection had required extensive analysis of political relationships and social connections to ensure that the deaths would appear to result from random misfortune rather than systematic targeting. The preparation phase for the carnival banquet had involved months of careful planning and coordination between Augusti's various specialist teams, each responsible for specific aspects of an operation that pushed the boundaries of what contemporary chemistry and logistics could accomplish. The menu had been designed to incorporate multiple delivery methods for different compounds, while creating a unified culinary experience that would be remembered as a masterpiece of gastronomic artistry. The banquet hall had been transformed into a fantastical recreation of classical mythology, with elaborate decorations and theatrical presentations that provided perfect cover for introducing specialized equipment and materials, while creating an atmosphere of celebratory chaos that would mask the systematic implementation of elimination procedure. The carnival theme had enabled Augusti to employ costumed assistants, whose true identities would remain concealed while they performed functions essential for the evening's success. Father Giuseppe had arrived at the banquet accompanied by several church officials, whose presence had been anticipated and incorporated into Augusti's planning, while the other targeted guests had been positioned throughout the hall according to careful arrangements that would enable optimal delivery of customized compounds, while maintaining the appearance of random seating assignment. The theatrical atmosphere had encouraged interaction between guests that facilitated the precise timing required for successful implementation. The progression of the meal had been choreographed with mathematical precision, each course timed to deliver specific compounds that would produce effects calculated to begin manifesting at predetermined intervals throughout the evening.
The complexity of the chemical interactions had required years of laboratory research and testing to ensure that multiple elimination operations could be conducted simultaneously without interfering with each other or creating obvious patterns that might alert surviving guests to the systematic nature of what was occurring. The centerpiece of Auguste's plan had involved the introduction of airborne compounds through the elaborate incense and theatrical smoke that were essential elements of the carnival atmosphere, enabling him to affect multiple targets simultaneously while creating effects that would appear to result from supernatural causes rather than chemical intervention. The religious symbolism of the evening had provided perfect cover for introducing elements that would be interpreted as divine judgment rather than human agency. Father Giuseppe's elimination had been accomplished through a combination of compounds that produced symptoms resembling mystical ecstasy followed by sudden cardiac failure, creating the appearance that the priest had been overcome by religious fervor while contemplating the spiritual significance of the carnival's allegorical presentation. The timing of his death during a moment of apparent divine revelation had been interpreted by witnesses as confirmation of his saintly nature rather than evidence of external intervention. The systematic elimination of the 12 noble families had been achieved through carefully coordinated administration of compounds, tailored to each victim's specific health profile and social circumstance, creating deaths that appeared to result from various natural causes while actually serving Auguste's strategic objective. The diversity of symptoms and timing had prevented recognition of the systematic nature of the eliminations, while providing Auguste with access to resources and connections that would enable expanded operation. The spectacular nature of the carnival banquet's tragic conclusion had created such powerful impressions among surviving witnesses that subsequent investigations had focused on supernatural explanations rather than systematic analysis of potential chemical causes. The elaborate theatrical elements had provided multiple alternative explanations for the evening's events, while the emotional impact of witnessing so many sudden deaths had impaired the analytical capabilities of potential witnesses. The evidence that Father Giuseppe had accumulated during his investigation had been destroyed during the chaos that followed the mass elimination event, as Auguste's agents had systematically removed or contaminated materials that might have provided clues about the systematic nature of the previous deaths. The priest's death had eliminated the only investigator capable of recognizing the connections between the various elimination operations, while the spectacular nature of the carnival banquet had overshadowed previous events. The aftermath of the Grand Carnival banquet had provided Auguste with opportunities to establish himself as one of the tragic event's most devastated survivors. His apparent grief and shock at losing so many valued clients and friends enhancing rather than diminishing his reputation within Venetian society. His immediate offer to organize memorial services and assist grieving families had been gratefully accepted, providing him with access to inheritance information and family connections that would serve future operational requirements. The new identity that Auguste had prepared for his departure from Venice had been established through years of careful documentation and relationship building in distant territories where his reputation as a master chef could be leveraged to gain access to new target populations while maintaining complete separation from his previous activity. The systematic destruction of evidence and elimination of witnesses had ensured that his Venetian operations would never be connected to his future activity. The ship that carried Auguste away from Venice had also transported carefully selected specialists and equipment that would enable immediate establishment of operations in new territories where wealthy targets awaited elimination by methods they could never anticipate or defend against. His success in Venice had proven that systematic application of scientific methods to criminal objectives could overcome any defensive measure while building capabilities that transcended anything that conventional law enforcement could detect or counter. The final chapter of Auguste's Venetian career had demonstrated that the most effective criminal enterprises were those that appeared to serve legitimate cultural and commercial functions while actually advancing objectives that conventional authorities could never identify or investigate. His collection of eliminated victims had provided not only substantial financial resources, but also comprehensive knowledge of systematic social manipulation that could be applied on scales that would reshape entire regions according to his will. As Auguste's ship disappeared into the Mediterranean darkness, La Tavola Dorata continued its reputation as Venice's finest restaurant under new management that remained ignorant of the laboratory complex beneath their kitchen. The poisoned chef had completed his masterpiece of systematic elimination and social manipulation, proving that the most dangerous predators were those who appeared to be ideal servants of the very society they were systematically destroying. The legend of the Grand Carnival banquet would endure for generations as evidence of divine judgment against moral corruption. While Auguste's true role in orchestrating the most sophisticated mass poisoning in European history would remain forever concealed behind a reputation for culinary genius and cultural refinement, the master chef had achieved perfect crime on a scale that transcended individual assassination to encompass systematic transformation of social structures through methods that conventional understanding could never comprehend or counter.